At a certain age, I remember kind of hearing voices. They weren't like cluing me in on anything. They weren't giving me like, secret information. It was almost like hearing people having some kind of mundane argument inside of my head. That was probably when I was 4 or 5. I don't put a lot of like value or weight into that outside of just the fact that it happened, like kind of showing that I have a capacity. But when I was younger, I don't remember visualizing things internally.
Join the Discovering Your Mind Facebook group and enjoy discussions, ask questions, and participate in the podcast in fun and unique ways. Aphantasia is a condition characterized by an inability to visualize mental images in one's mind. If you have just discovered that you or someone you love has aphantasia, or if you're just fascinated by the subject in general and love learning more about it, you are in the right place. The Discovering Your Mind podcast delves into all aspects of the mind's eye, including aphantasia, hyperphantasia, and everything in between. Welcome to the Discovering Your Mind podcast, brought to you by shanesbraindomain.com. I am your host, Shane Williams, also known as Shane's Brain. And today we're talking with the one and only Edward Jones. Hi, Edward. How you doing?
Hey, Shane. I'm good. Excited to talk with you a bit.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. We had Edward on the Outside the Norm episode a little while ago, but I wanted to have him back because he's got a lot of cool things to say, and I wanted to delve a little bit more into his experiences. So welcome, Edward. Why don't you just start out by telling us a little bit about what you do for a living?
Yeah, so I live in Minneapolis, and I work for the public library system. I've worked at lots of different branches. It's 41 libraries altogether, but I've been at the downtown branch for the last 2 or 3 years and kind of like a worker bee. I'm not quite a librarian, but I work alongside librarians to get the place in order and serve the public and put on programs. And there's a lot of autonomy, a lot of independence, which I like. Alongside that, I like to do music. So I also release music online, and I'd be happy to share that link at the end of the conversation.
Yes, let's do that for sure.
Cool.
So what type of music do you do? Do you play instruments? Do you sing? What do you do?
I'm a song and dance man. No, I do a few things. I think that the core of what I do is like Americana. So it's singing influenced by Jeff Tweedy, Bob Dylan, voices like that. But recently I've been layering beats and trying to do something a little bit more modern so I can do all my live instrumentation, but with maybe more of a dance orientation to it. So it's cool to sing on top of that, blend different genres.
Okay. Sounds very cool. All right. What else? Anything else you like to do for fun or any other interests?
I've studied astrology for the last 15 years, practiced on and off professionally, but that's another thing that really interests me. Just looking at patterns and psychology and archetypes. It's all really cool.
In this episode, we will be referring to what we call the apple graph. If you would like to view the apple graph to play along and better understand what we're talking about, you can find it on shanesbraindomain.com in the Aphantasia and Beyond section. If you are unable to view the apple graph for whatever reason, it is a graph divided into 6 sections. In the number 6 section, there is a very detailed image of a red apple. In the number 5 section, it is the same image but with less detail. Number 4 is still in color but has less detail and more basic shapes instead of detailed hues and gradients. Number 3 is the less detailed apple, but in gray tones without the color. Number 2 is a simple outline of the apple. And number 1 is blank, indicating no visualization whatsoever. This is called aphantasia. All right, the first thing I'd like you to do is visualize a red apple in your mind.
Okay.
Okay. Now take a look at this graph here and let me know which one of those best represents what you saw in your mind's eye.
I would say it's a variation of 2, somewhere in between 1 and 2, because it's not quite the outline, but I feel like there's a light almost shining in the spatial region where the apple is supposed to be. And intrinsically, I know it's an apple, but I don't really see anything, but it's not black in the sense that there's nothing there. It just feels like there's some kind of like space made out of like subtle light.
Wow, that is such a cool description. So would you say that's generally what happens with you when either someone asks you to visualize like I just did, or just your thoughts in general? Do you get that kind of, maybe just kind of a light or a sense quite often when you think about things or try to imagine things?
You know, the light isn't something that I focus on. I think it's often there, but it's not something I've learned to interpret. My interpretation of thoughts and feelings and whatever wants to come out is more so just a felt sense. And I'm not really distracted by like whatever stimuli there is. I don't really know how much there is, how little there is. It just feels like it's not completely black, but there's not like a visual component either.
Interesting. Okay, so do you ever get like a quick flash of an image? Does that ever happen to you?
I know what that feels like to some degree. And it has happened before in some of those outside the norm experiences. Like on a meditation retreat, for example, I would have not high definition images necessarily, but images that I knew what they were, and maybe they'd last for a moment or maybe a little bit longer. But typically there's no visual component to my inner experience. I dream sometimes, but it's not visual, I think, in the same way that people would expect it to be.
Okay. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your experience in discovering aphantasia, how you found out about it, kind of how it affected you, what you thought about it, and journey you've been on since you discovered it?
I don't remember the exact timeline. I know the last 2 or 3 years I've been really interested in the inner workings of the mind. You know, why, I guess in my case, I am the way that I am, but I think it's a broader question for each of us. And it was probably like a subreddit post or like somebody posting something on Instagram or Facebook, and I saw the word aphantasia. I probably had some experience of an understanding of it beforehand, because it's not like I ever have a memory of being able to visualize on a consistent basis. So I've reflected on it before, but I didn't have the name for it. So when I saw the name and people writing about their experiences and realizing that I really resonated with a lot of what people were saying, that had me diving a little bit deeper. So I recognized that it wasn't just a visual thing for me, but it was also the other senses for the most part. Then also alongside that, there's been a lot of cool self-reflection, because I think that the brain is really malleable at an early age. And I asked the question, like, why do people have the experience of not being able to see internally when other people can?
And what do you think about that? You think there's a deeper reason or meaning behind it all?
Yeah, I think there's a reason. I don't know if it's a specific reason. I have a few thoughts about that, and it's not completely organized, but I wonder how much it has to do with the dispositions of the caretakers or parents, like whether they're more like analytically oriented, or whether they have patterns of that sort of split between the inner and outer perception, you know, maybe emotional neglect. I'm not like tapped into one thing for sure. Like I appreciate my life. I appreciate the way that I experience things. So it's never like a complaint, but I just wonder like where it might come from, or whether it is just built into people's systems.
Right. Yeah, I wonder about all that stuff as well. So before you heard the actual word aphantasia, it sounds like you had kind of an understanding that we weren't all the same and that there were different internal experiences.
To some degree, I didn't realize how polarized is the wrong word, because I don't know, you can't see inside anybody's head, so you don't know exactly how they're perceiving things. But I had a sense that I was experiencing a lot less internally than other people. Like, for example, I'm a songwriter, but my writing process is something I'm still honing in on, because I'm not organizing the notes or the lyrics or the concepts or feelings internally, really. I'm just writing down onto a page. And sometimes I come up with some really brilliant stuff, but that's not being a direct conduit from this internal place. It's almost like coming from this deeper place, and then I communicate it and it passes over the internal part altogether. So I knew that that was a little different than how a lot of other writers worked. I knew that when I was able to visualize something, whether it was from like a psychedelic induced experience or like a meditation retreat, that was an anomaly for me. That wasn't something that happened all the time. And I realized that some people had that experience like all the time.
Right. Do you have any insight on psychedelics? I mean, you have a lot more experience with them than I do. Do you know if people who visualize in their day-to-day life, if that psychedelic experience is different in some way? I mean, I know that for us, it's like a way different experience. But is their experience very similar to visualizing, or is it different? Do you know? Have you ever talked to anyone about that?
Never about the specific qualities of their visual experience, besides hearing stories from certain people or friends about experiences that sounded so immersive that they were difficult for me to fathom. I think I might have described this in the other episode that we did together. You know, the feelings are there, like the feelings and the intensity and like the sense of joy and the, real just sense of like, I don't know what it is, this vitality that sometimes like taking something like mushrooms or something else might inspire in like a person's physiology. So I have that, but it's like I don't have the visual aspect to sort of parallel it. So I wouldn't say that, from my understanding, my experience is like dramatically different outside of like the visual aspect. But when you don't have those visual clues and you're feeling something really intense, it can be disorienting because you don't have like a visual context for why you're feeling a certain way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. It reminds me of another conversation I recently had where we're talking about, PTSD and how that can affect, visualizers differently than, someone with aphantasia, but it's not necessarily less, it's just different. So you could be experiencing the emotions and everything just as intense, just without the visualization, which could be just as traumatic.
Absolutely.
If you don't have that connection.
Like imagine if you're deathly afraid of a dog and one person is afraid of that dog and they're able to visualize the dog and they, might see it in certain postures, like maybe growling in a certain way. And that's viscerally scary for them. They feel it internally. And then the other person might have aphantasia and they can't see the dog, but they have just this sense of dread and doom, but it's not linked to like a visual experience. They might know it's the dog, but they don't necessarily see the dog. And They're both feeling on a deep level, but one person happens to have like the context for why they're feeling that way.
Yeah, that is so interesting. The next thing I would like you to do is imagine a chicken in your mind.
Okay.
Okay. Can you tell me in as much detail as you can what was happening in your mind when you were trying to do that? If anything.
Okay. So it wasn't like a direct image, but it was like this stenciled sense of like what the image might have been. And what came to me was this book that I used to read. It was an English author named, I think, Andy Griffith. And the illustrations were very funny. And one of the characters was a mechanical chicken with like these big eyes that would pop out and these funny expressions. And I kind of had a glimpse of that, but it wasn't like a visual one. It was just like seeing the eyes and knowing what the context was.
Okay. So something very specific came to mind.
Yeah, in that case, yep.
In that glimpse that you got, was there any other sort of details? Was there color involved? Was there movement involved? Was it 3D or 2D? Did any of that come through as well?
No, it was just that felt sense. I didn't see anything. It was almost like echolocation. I didn't see anything, but I could experience like maybe the space around the chicken, like constructing the chicken without actually using space. You know how like bats use echolocation and they can ping off the wall or the cave and see how far like the distance is. It was almost like that. Like there was no visual component. There were no colors.
Okay. Is there any difference in the thought depending on if your eyes are closed or your eyes are open?
No, there's no difference in the thought, but there's a difference in the light patterns. So when I close my eyes and I try to visualize something, and part of this is obviously going to be like sitting in a room with like bright lights. I'm going to see some of that like residually, like in my experience as well. But then I also think that there's some light happening when I close my eyes, just even in the dark. So I don't experience that when my eyes are open, and when they're closed, it's like very subtle.
Okay. So I've noticed that when I've asked you to visualize or to imagine, you do close your eyes. Is there a reason behind that? Is that just it helps you get there better to focus on what you're trying to think about?
I don't think it's super conscious. Like, okay. I think I just do it automatically because maybe that's just my expectation for myself.
Okay. If this robot chicken made a sound, could you hear it in your mind?
In a certain way. It's not hearing it though. Like I feel like I hear it from my heart more than I hear it from my head. I feel like it's just the pressure of like what that sound might be.
Okay. So would you say it's more of a knowing?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's talk about the words real quick. So far, I've used the word visualize. I've used the word imagine. There's also, picture it in your mind or think about it. Do those different words have any different meanings to you at all, or are they all kind of the same thing?
I use some of that language just in day-to-day life because it conveys something when you say picture this or I'm imagining this, but it's never like the actual visualization. Like what I've described so far is my typical experience. So I don't really take them at face value. Like when I hear picture this, like if someone is guiding a meditation and they expect you to like immerse yourself in whatever like the visual experience is, I'm not going to be able to do that. But if somebody says like imagine this or imagine that, I'm able to do it in the way that my psyche wants to do it. And I'm comfortable enough doing that. I'm not going to get attached to the image. I'm not going to necessarily see the image or tell you what colors there are, but I can like hone in on that. And that's comfortable enough for me. Like there's other language that I like to use, but I'm happy with picture this or imagine this or visualize that.
Okay. So when you're doing those meditations and they really start getting into the visualize this thing and they get very specific, does that bother you at all? I sometimes get frustrated by those things. Does that bother you, or are you able to do it just fine?
I don't do that. That's not the type of meditation that I like. I'm more interested in just breathing and tuning into my own system and letting things just emerge. I know that people get a lot out of being able to like drop into a relaxed state, like maybe being hypnotized to some degree, but it doesn't really work for me.
Yeah, same. Okay. What does the phrase daydreaming mean to you?
It doesn't mean anything at all. It's the same thing as like visualize or imagine that or picture this, where I understand what it means conceptually for other people. And I have like maybe my own parallel to how that works for me, but I'm typically not thinking about anything. It's like the thoughts are running through my body maybe, but I'm not processing them in the same way that somebody would process things moving through their head. It's like I know they're there and I'm able to tune into like whatever comes up, but it's not distracting me at all. So there's not a sense of like getting lost in whatever's taking place in my head.
Okay. So do you feel like you can not think of anything?
I don't think I'm consciously thinking like 98% of the time. I think that I'm on silent like a majority of the time. Like I still feel things in my body. I still feel anxiety sometimes. I still feel whatever pressures are coming at me from like the outside world or from internally, but it's not like I'm being swept into a different world. I'm right here.
I'm resonating very much with that. And the way I describe it is the thoughts are so quiet and so distant and so vague that sometimes I even have a hard time even noticing them.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
A
lot of people have no idea what I'm talking about when I say stuff like that.
So I have an interest that, it's a slight movement in the conversation, but it might fascinate you. Have you heard of human design?
No.
Okay. So it's kind of like a parallel to astrology in the sense that everybody has like a chart rather than like describing like a timeline of a person's life or the types of like symbols or like patterns or archetypes that would show up in their life or their personality or whatever, it talks about like the way that a person is best able to function in the world, like how their body operates, how their mind operates, you know, whether they're like an intrinsically heady person, whether there's somebody who's more tuned into like subtle sense. And I think it gives a lot of clues into how a person who has aphantasia actually like is able to optimally process the world and process their inner experience. I don't have enough experience like checking people's charts and like correlating it with whether they can visualize or not. You know, so you can have an emotional awareness, or you can have like maybe an awareness that's based around like the visualizations that you have in your head, or the emotional experience, like whatever you're feeling and how that's impacting like your perspective of the world. And then there's a splenic experience, which is much more subtle, and it's much more about the felt sense. And it's less about like, do this or do that or do this, and more like this internal kind of pinging, like this internal kind of understanding of what is supposed to happen. It's not thought based at all. And I feel like that's a really good description of like the way that I process the world. And it's a whole other conversation because human design is a big topic, but it's an interesting one to look into, and I'd be happy to talk more about that now or another time.
Yeah, I just wrote it down. I want to look into that. So, yeah, I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about it if you could. Like, where do these charts come from? Like, what's the basis of it?
Okay, that's a little more out there. I can give the basis, but I'm not going to explain why because I have no idea why. Essentially, it's taking the positions of the planets when a person was born and then like 3 months before they were born and superimposing them onto a chart that is kind of shaped like a person with like these different centers representing different aspects of their experience. You know, there's the emotional center, there's the sacral center, which is about like sustainable working energy. There's the head center, which is about like pressure through like thoughts, whether they're coming from inside of you or from outside of you. The positions of the planets are superimposed onto the hexagrams of the I Ching. So it's almost combining all these different divinatory tools. And then the combination of all those things creates a body graph, which is going to be different for every single person. So why it works, I have absolutely no idea, but I've been doing this stuff for long enough where it feels pretty spot on in my mind.
So it is tied to astrology in a sense.
Yeah, astrology or like the positions of the planets. Like if you break astrology down, it's just like the archetypes of what the planets represent. And essentially, I don't know, like astrology is kind of a meme, but like astrology is made up of like smaller parts, and those parts have like practical meaning. Yeah, I guess it is tied to astrology.
Okay. I mean, that's what came to my mind, but I understand it's different, but it sounded similar. While we're on this, one of the things that studying this topic for me and talking to so many people about it is just this idea of just how beautifully unique everybody is on so many levels. And that kind of came to mind when you were talking about the human design thing. I just see so many people just arguing about it, everything like, I'm right, you're wrong. And I've just been able to just kind of take a step back and just, I don't know if it's open-mindedness or what, but I just let everybody have the experience that they're having and the perspective that they have. And I'm not into, arguing about stuff anymore. I've kind of let that part of me go. Is there any of that within that as well? I mean, I kind of get that vibe from you as well. What do you think about that?
100%. I've had phases in my life where I wanted to win arguments, or I wanted to convince people of other things because I felt like my take on the world was valid. Right. And sometimes more valid than other people. This would have been at least a few years ago. I think the last 2 or 3 years, I've been in a more insular, but like positive kind of place where I've been more accepting and I've been more curious about the differences between people. And I think when we're able to open up the conversations around like, how do you experience your internal reality? Or how do things organize themselves inside of you, or any of those things that really comment on how different we all are. I think that's when the conversation becomes less about, this is how I see it, so it's right, or, this is how you see it, so it's wrong, and more about just appreciating the differences and finding like the value in what one person might bring to the world and what another person might bring to the world.
Right. And I think this topic really shines a light on that. It helps us get there, or it helped me get there, because, there's so many people that I talk to about this, and their previous understanding was we're all the same. Oh, I thought everybody was the same, right? That's what everybody thinks about this stuff. And so a lot of people have a hard time believing the other side. Like, yeah, I mean, I've talked to people like, yeah, I don't really believe that people can't really see, or the other side of the spectrum. Yeah, I don't think they can actually see. It's just a misunderstanding, right? You have such a hard time getting out of our own tunnel vision of experience to just simply understand, why can't their experience be different than mine? Why am I so stuck on it can't be, And so this conversation of aphantasia, hyperphantasia, and just how different everybody is really opened my mind to, I don't know anything. I'm not going to judge anybody, because there's no way I can understand what their experience is in any way.
I'm not a scientist, and obviously the ability to measure things and then obviously build in response to that is an amazing contribution that modern science has brought to the world. And at the same time, I think we internalize how precise and consistent that we want our experience of the world to look from the outside, like based on this kind of scientific understanding, that we branch everything together and say, well, this is how it works, and it's not allowed to deviate outside of that. Right. And I think realistically, being able to tune into like how something actually operates, and in this case, like that means the human mind, the human psyche, and how each of us operates as individuals, I feel like that's like a deeper level of science, or a deeper level of understanding that a lot of people will poo-poo because they're more focused on what's going on externally. So there's not a lot of value or time to put into what a lot of people would call navel gazing, when you're reflecting on, well, how do we experience the internal world differently? A lot of people don't have time or energy for that, but it feels like a really fundamental conversation because it keys into how different we actually are.
All right. Very well said. I appreciate your perspective on that. All right. We've talked a little bit about this with your music, but what is your creative process?
So it's changing a little bit. Honestly, over the last couple of weeks, I feel like I've hit on something, but I'll just speak generally. For a long time, I would wait for inspiration, and that inspiration would have to come up in very certain contexts. Usually it wasn't like sitting down with a notebook and writing. It was often having to wait for a friend or something. So I have 20 minutes with myself in a notebook, and I jot something down, and I'm able to just write in a way that tunes into something, but it's totally unplanned. So that's how my creative process has kind of looked in the past. And that was, I think, something I pedestalized a lot because I never knew when the inspiration would hit. So I wasn't able to create as consistently as I wanted to. Lately, it's been more stream of conscious, where I haven't been aiming for anything. I've kind of accepted that I can't aim for a lot of things. Like when I write, I can't necessarily have like a really honed in intention. It's just kind of writing like in response to whatever energy I might be feeling, or like whatever like internal architecture is coming up to the surface. I think my creative process is really similar to the way that I just communicate in general, which is not reflecting on the thoughts that are coming up. Like when I'm talking to you right now, the words are just coming. There's no internal feedback besides like whether they feel right or wrong. And
right.
I think if I speak slowly enough, they feel right. And it's just kind of like that for guitar and writing lyrics as well. And then eventually a song sometimes shows up.
Okay. What do you mean by a song shows up? In what way does it show up? Because we haven't really delved into this yet, but do you have like inner sound at all? Do you hear anything in your mind at all?
It's the same thing. I'm not visualizing it, or I'm not like audibly hearing it. But if there's a song that I've been listening to on repeat, and I've had a few of those lately, I have that sense of what the song is. I can almost take apart the lyrics a little bit, not in like an analytical way, but just where I'm really feeling the lyrics and they're hitting very deeply. And that's what I kind of sense when I say a song is stuck in my head, or when there's a compulsion to listen to something over and over again. So if it's one of my own songs, like say that I come up with a lyric that feels meaningful, and then I'll just kind of sit with it for a while, not like necessarily sitting to the exclusion of the rest of my life, but going out on my day and knowing that that lyric feels meaningful and important. It's not hearing it. It's not like seeing the script like over the projector of my mind. It's just experiencing what that thing represents in a totally non-tangible way.
Okay. I write poetry, and I'm trying to compare my creative process with what you're talking about. And in a lot of ways, it sounds similar, but for me, a lot of times it feels like I'm not really doing it. Like it's coming from behind the scenes somewhere. Like, and then another thing that sometimes happens to me, like if I'm crafting a poem, a lot of times I'll have to give it a lot of thought, and it'll sometimes take months to form. And there are other times where it just seems like it just pours out of me from somewhere I don't even know, and it's just there. Is that what you meant by sometimes a song will just come to you? Do you feel like it just flows from somewhere beyond yourself?
100%. And I think what's also important with the beyond myself is I think a lot of what I write, not all of it, because I've been learning to write in a more mundane sense. Like, I think part of the reason why it's been difficult for me in the past to write a lot of songs that I was happy with was because I was trying to hone in on a very lofty, like elevated place to write from. It felt like I was almost getting the songs from maybe a more like aligned version of myself, like an internal version of myself that like had access to like this creative energy, and I was able to like be a conduit for it. And then these days I've been trying to write in a more mundane way, like just writing my thoughts, like stream of consciousness. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with some of these musicians, but in a way that's kind of similar to like David Berman or like Mark Koselleck or like some Bob Dylan, just kind of writing in a way that isn't trying to be lofty or like elevated necessarily. It's just kind of writing about what I see or experience. And none of that's necessarily coming from me. Like if I write about like, say something I experienced at work at the public library where there's so much interface with people and so many stories and so many books that I'm like coming across throughout my day, I'm not really like reflecting on that specific experience. I just know that there's something being reflected from that and the words just come out, but they're not coming from that surface level of me. They're not coming from a way that I could say this is like undeniably my own.
Okay, very cool. I like that. All right. So last time I had you on, we talked about outside the norm experiences. Is there anything else that we didn't cover last time that you'd like to delve into with that?
The experiences that I have had where I've been able to visualize to some degree, the visualization aspect of that hasn't stuck with me, but some of the gifts that have come with that, like, you know, maybe for like an hour having like this experience where I'm able to see things to some degree, even if I can't see things afterwards, there's like more of an energetic sensitivity to what that inner perception might feel like.
Yeah, that is so cool. And that's definitely how I feel about my psychedelic experience. You know, it was cool to see some of those colors and patterns and stuff, but that's just scratching the surface of what the whole experience was like.
This was kind of interesting. I was doing some stuff at the library, and I work all over the place, and it's a big building. It's 4 floors. But my main sort of digs is the 4th floor, which is history, social sciences, philosophy, psychology, religion. So I stumble across a lot of cool books. And I open one up. It was recently written, and it was something about just psychedelic experiences, interviewing different people. And there was one person who was talking about this phase of his life where he was like given the opportunity to take acid on a really regular basis. And he said when he was doing it in like high doses, like they were impactful, but he wasn't really able to take as much with him into his day-to-day life. So he started like microdosing, which is taking a very, very small amount. And he was like seeing how that impacted and influenced like the rest of his life, because he wasn't like being sucked out of his actual experience, but it was like this other layer was being added on top of it. And it kind of makes me think of, what is it, homeopathy, like where you have just like the essence of something and you're able to almost experience the full picture of it, because I don't know, it's like you don't need all the visual aspects. It's more like you need the seed of feeling, the seed like of experience. Yeah, there's something powerful about like being able to see a lot of things and like being sucked into this kind of vortex of an experience, but you're not going to be able to bring as much with you. And I think the most important thing oftentimes is like how we're able to take those kind of peak experiences and like integrate them into our actual lives. And that's not going to be as much about the visualization. It's more about like how we're able to kind of balance those things together.
You're a wonderful dancer, she said with a smile, as I shimmied and shuffled and boogied with style. Thank you, I stammered. I appreciate that, but I just need to know where the bathroom is at. All Mixed Up, a motley horde of funny poems, is available on shanesbraindomain.com and Amazon.
You've talked a little bit about, possibilities of something happening in childhood that has maybe blocked our ability. Just personally, do you feel like you had any different experiences or abilities as a child than you do now? Can you tap into that at all?
Not visualization experiences. At a certain age, I remember kind of hearing voices. They weren't like cluing me in on anything. They weren't giving me like, secret information. It was almost like hearing people having some kind of mundane argument inside of my head. That was probably when I was 4 or 5. I don't put a lot of like value or weight into that outside of just the fact that it happened, like kind of showing that I have a capacity. But when I was younger, I don't remember visualizing things internally. Like the way that I process things now is just as reflective of the way that I processed things when I was 4 or 5.
Okay. When you had that internal conversation going on as a child when you were 4 or 5, did that feel audible? Did that feel like you were actually hearing it? Did that feel different than how it is now?
There were acoustics to it. I could hear the voices very, very clearly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how it is for you now. So again, with the visual aspects, we have this language of visualize, picture, imagine that we've talked about. But in the audible world, there's similar things like we have inner monologue or inner voice or inner dialogue or self-talk. Do you feel like you have or experienced those things, and in what way?
No. Then if there was like a little bit of a yes, it's the somatic thing again. I don't hold myself as separate from like the internal self-reflection that I think we all do, or like the pressure that we experience internally about like maybe how we want our life to look like, or if there's any kind of like internal sense of like critique. Like I don't know exactly what people experience with an inner monologue, but I've heard from people that it's overwhelming. I can experience things somatically. Like maybe I feel like a lot of tightness in my shoulders, and maybe somebody else who would experience that same kind of circumstance, it would come out as like an internal monologue. I don't experience like the internal monologue aspect of that. Like as far as I can tell, my mind is blank enough, like at least on the surface, but I still experience like tension. I still experience like anxiety. I still experience like this felt body sense, but it all skips just the audible part. It skips the visual part.
Right. That's a good explanation of that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So kind of along those same lines, how would you define a thought? What is a thought?
I have no idea. Like, okay, so I'm giving myself permission for a thought to emerge. Like, there's nothing there. It's like a shadow of like it's like a shadow of the wind. Like,
Right.
there's no thought. Like, and if I were to bring up a thought, like, let me reflect on something that interests me. Like, I like astrology a lot. There's a new moon. So I can say, well, the new moon was at 28 degrees Sagittarius. Where does it fall on my chart? Like, how does that impact me? How would this moon cycle impact me as an individual? What does it connect with, like, in terms of like landing on a planet or at different points in my chart? Those are thoughts. Like, I think people would say, like, well, you're thinking right now. You're thinking about things. But I'm not thinking about things. I almost feel like I'm operating like a computer, like where it's bypassing the thoughts altogether. It's just, it knows the path of least resistance in order for the information to process itself without me needing to do anything.
Yeah, I again love that description because, I just interviewed Kristen that was also on the Outside the Norm episode, and she described a very similar thing. Like, there is no forethought. The way I think is through speaking. It comes out in language, and that's kind of what I hear you saying.
100%. And it's funny how like uncanny a lot of these similarities are. Like, it sounds like a lot of what I've been saying is connected enough to your experience too. Is that right?
Yeah. Which resonating very well. That's why I asked you to describe a thought, because I can't do it either.
Right.
Like,
is there any weight to yours? Like, would you say that there's weight, like when a thought shows up?
No, it feels like there's a disconnect.
Like, I'm like you, where there's a distance. Like, I feel like I'm separated by some unfathomable like amount of space between whatever thoughts or the equivalent, whatever's going on, and like my actual experience.
Right. Okay. Here's another one I don't know if you can answer. Do your thoughts happen one at a time or many at once?
What? I don't know. Like, I guess one at a time in a certain sense, but it's like one at a time in like, well, sometimes there's a croissant, and sometimes there's like, some buttered banana bread, and sometimes there's a whole soup with all kinds of stuff mixed together. There's no consistency to it. And I couldn't say whether there's one thing or a lot of things, because it's like constantly changing, and there's nothing tangible to hold on to at the same time too, which makes it even more difficult to say whether it's one thing or a lot of things.
Right.
Like, when I need to know something, I'm usually just bypassing everything that's going on up here. Like, if you were to ask me like a math problem.
What is 7 times 12?
Okay, so 70 plus 14, that's 84. Yeah, it's like a calculator kind of. There's no questioning, which I think is kind of a cool skill, like when you think about it. Like, there's no questioning of the answer. It's like the answer is either there or it's not. And if I'm wrong, then hopefully I'm going to be confronted by like external reality and, optimize the internal system a little bit better.
Okay. Do you feel like you have control over your thoughts?
What thoughts? Like, okay, say that I'm in a place where I am experiencing a lot of internal distraction. I had an experience where I was like withdrawing from a medication a few years ago, and it was like I was pulled into like this very, very different kind of reality where there was a lot of anxiety and there were a lot of thoughts. So I can relate to what that experience feels like. And I never want to pay attention to the thoughts, and I think that's pretty straightforward. That's like Buddhism, the thoughts, right. Maybe they have value in their own sense, but in terms of like self-understanding, I don't think for most of us that's actually going to come from our thoughts, including from the visualizers, including from like the thinkers. And I know that when I was in that place of like a lot of internal kind of overwhelm, my instinct when I'm tuned in is just to like sink into my body. And like, even though it's still going to be uncomfortable, like there's a lot more value to me in like feeling the tension in my shoulder or in my chest or my leg or in my toes than questioning what every little like thought like might represent. Because to me, that's just going to create more chaos. Like, when I try to figure out what the thoughts mean, that's just going to lead to more thoughts. And then you create this redundancy of thinking where like the thoughts just kind of echo each other. And I'm not as interested in that. I don't know how to operate that way quite as well. I operate better when I'm able to recognize that I'm being distracted, recognize that I'm being overwhelmed by something, and then breathe for a little bit and try to get back into my body. So as fascinated as I am by like early childhood experience and why we are the way that we are, at the same time, I'm holding that with like an appreciation where even if, say that somebody experienced a lot of like childhood neglect and like for a certain period of their life, say it was like from like 6 months to like 2 years old, and it impacted them in a way where they were cut off from their internal experience. And now they're however old, you know, and they don't have like the capacity to like think or visualize in a conventional way. There are still a lot of skills that come from that. There are still a lot of like abilities and like foresights, like when they're able to kind of like acknowledge and recognize that that's how they see the world. So it's like holding both of these things at the same time. The fact that like, you know, the psyche is malleable, especially at an early age. And there are things that might be like on the surface, difficult experiences that impacted the person. And they come with a lot of gifts most of the time. If like we can like learn how to appreciate what they mean and how it allows us to process the world. I don't like saying good or bad necessarily. I just like what feels to me like a more objective approach. Like, okay, somebody experiences the world this way. There's an optimal way to tune into that where like they're turning that into a gift rather than turning that into a detriment.
Right. I do love that a lot. It's basically loving what is, right? There's no such thing as bad weather, just different kinds of good weather, kind of a way to think about life. And sometimes I sum it up with, it's perfect, right? And I know a lot of people don't understand what I mean by that. For me, it's loving my aphantasia because I have aphantasia.
Mm.
As simple as that, right? I don't know how I got there because a lot of people struggle with that, but that's kind of what I hear you saying in some respect.
To me, there are two different definitions that might show up of perfection. There's the one that is lofty and skillful and might look really externally successful on the surface. And we have this idea of like, you know, what it means to maybe walk in the realm of heaven while on earth, you know, the people who can find success in whatever. And that's a definition of perfection. And then the one that I think you're honing in on that I feel more of like an attunement to, which is just this sensitivity to what is without needing to change it.
Right.
And I've gone on a couple longer meditation retreats. I've had a few phases of my life where I had a more regular practice. And I remember at one of these retreats, you know, it was like a week-long silent somatic meditation retreat, really cozy environment in Colorado. And at the end, we would have a kind of discussion, or we would ask questions to this really grounded woman who was the teacher. And I remember there was someone there who was sharing all of these really kind of extravagant like visualizations where it felt like he was pulled out of his experience and he was flying through the air, or like, you know, witnessing some kind of like Buddhist deity, like coming and doing something to his character and his internal world. I don't know what he was going through, but it sounded like it was throughout the entire week. And I was listening to that and it felt so far-fetched to me because I described in the last episode we did together, like seeing a tree and experiencing that, but it was never anything that really pulled me out of my experience. And I've had people comment on, like when I've described like the lack of thoughts or the lack of like internal distraction, they say, well, that's what a lot of people aspire to. You know, that's why people meditate. That's why people like spend so much time in monasteries. And I don't see it for me as like having achieved some kind of state. I feel like it's more like I've learned how my own system operates enough to like relax to some degree into that. And there's just not a lot of like stimulus on the surface that's like distracting me. And there's a perfection there too, because I'm just feeling what's already there. I'm not trying to change anything.
Right. So we talked about the inner experience of seeing. You don't have that. Hearing, you don't have that. Do you have any of the other senses of smell, taste, or touch?
It would be kind of funny if I had one of those in isolation.
Yeah. And I've talked to people that are that way. They'll have just one out of the 5. Let's talk a little bit about reading. When you read a novel, how well can you think about what the characters and the surroundings might look like?
Oh, well, I'm in the process of learning how to read right now, so I can't answer that fully. No, just kidding.
Yeah, just the librarian.
It's just the librarian. That's a good question. I haven't been reading a lot of novels lately.
Do you like reading at all?
These days, I wish I could read, but I'm like brain rot. I spend too much time on the internet. So I wish I was reading more, but I need to redevelop that patience. But there have been times where I was a nonstop reader, like probably until I was 14 or 15. I was just always reading books. And with a novel, like say characters, I'm like reflecting on some of my favorite books. I really like John Irving, like Doctorow, Steinbeck, Kerouac. And the characters kind of exist in their own world. Like I don't feel like I have a lot of interface with them. I don't feel like they're fleshed out. It's kind of like reading the script of a play. I'm not imagining the play, but I'm given enough clues, hopefully, where I can like derive the context of the book. So nothing's like popping up like in the flesh, but I'm able to follow things if it's well written.
Okay. I've always had a hard time reading novels. I enjoy reading, nonfiction, but with fiction, I've always had kind of a hard time getting into it because it just feels like words on a page to me and not much more than that. But it feels like you're able to have kind of a deeper, richer experience with it than that.
Words are very important to me. Like words are very, very important to me. I can't describe exactly how, but the way that words come together to me is like, it's like working in a 5-star restaurant. That's like what I aspire for. So when I can read something that feels like the words are elevated in a way where it's not just conveying something, but also conveying a certain kind of energy. It's not just about describing the characters, but it's about like forming a blanket, like to communicate whatever the author's trying to communicate. Like I love well-written prose. And I think that's what I take the most. It's not like what pops up in my mind. It's not seeing these characters actually doing the things that they're doing, but it's reading about it in a way that feels eloquent, reading about it in a way that feels poetic.
Right. What does the phrase counting sheep mean to you?
Absolutely nothing. Like I've heard it, obviously. And it's funny too, with like those visual clues, like counting sheep or like picture this or the expressions people use, realizing that doesn't really resonate for you or doesn't really resonate for me, and recognizing how embedded it is into the way that we communicate and like culture.
All right. Do you dream?
Sometimes it's not visual, I would say, but there's more like visual residue. Like there's maybe a visualization, like in terms of the Apple scale, maybe it's a little closer to like a 3.5. Like I know what it feels like to visualize things just from the experiences that I shared in the last episode. And there's not quite that much when I'm dreaming, but sometimes there's enough where like I could tell you how something was structured, or I could tell you like this plot of a dream in more detail than I'm typically able to follow my thoughts. And that's not all the time. Like there's certain dreams that have like stuck with me that would have been from a while ago. Maybe some that I wrote down and just ended up remembering after because they felt significant. But there's no fully fledged immersive experience. Like I remember when I met somebody for the first time who could lucid dream, where he's experiencing this multifaceted reality in his dreams that he has like the ability to control. He told me that he had one night where the dream lasted 2 years.
Really?
And that blew my mind because I've always been interested in this kind of stuff. And like, it was always kind of from the outside because my experience is already just so different from that there was something that just couldn't click or make sense. So when I heard his story, when I heard his experience, when I would hear him talk about like the visual components that he would experience in his dreams or like in his day-to-day life, I was listening to him almost like an anthropologist, where I was deeply, deeply fascinated and I wanted to hear more, but I really couldn't relate to it on like a fundamental level.
Are your dreams in color? Can you tell?
I would say yes, but I can't tell you anything about the color. Like to me, the feeling I get is probably closer to like a middle ground between color and grayscale. Like it's not important enough to me, like the color aspect, where that really sticks with me.
In your dreams, you get some visual. Do any of those other senses show up in your dreams at all? Sound or smell or taste or touch? Can you tell?
I've had like 2 or 3 experiences where I've had a melody, and I've loved that because inspiration is fun, especially if I'm able to wake up and like play it on the guitar or record it with my voice, but never as like a regular experience. And I don't dream often enough, at least as far as I remember, to say whether it's a consistent thing or not.
One more last question on dreams. Can you tell if they're in first person or third person?
I think the most notable ones to me would have been first person. And usually it's not me engaging as like an active whatever. Like I don't recall myself like voicing things. I don't recall myself like overly engaging, but it's more like I'm experiencing things and people are engaging with me and I'm like kind of a clearer vessel in the process. That feels more like first person, but then there's also this sense of like objectively just like kind of taking in the space without filling it with my own stuff.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about memories. If you want to recall a memory, how does that manifest?
Same thing. It's like distant. And this is interesting actually too, because I've been doing something kind of similar to like EMDR the last few weeks. So I've been doing something kind of similar called ART with my therapist. And we haven't delved into it too much. And she's aware that like I don't have like this internal visualization. So there's a little more leniency where it's not like bring up the image. It's more like however the image wants to come up inside of me without necessarily just being visual. And I can experience it, but it's never in a way that takes me away from like the present moment. It's never in a way that like sweeps me away. It's not overwhelming. It's not distracting. And typically the memories that I do have are about emotional things. I think I'm really sensitive. I don't think I'm like innately like an overly emotional person, but I think I'm really sensitive and attuned to like emotional experiences. So all of the memories that I have were emotional to some degree, whether it was like some kind of like childhood intensity or like, you know, intensity as I've gotten a little older, or like some kind of joy or a funny experience of like bonding with somebody else. Those are the experiences that stick with me, not because of like things that happened in terms of like details or like what someone was wearing or what the weather was like, and more so how I'm able to feel that now in my body. Like they stick with me, not because of something I saw, but because of the impact that they might have had.
Okay. Does it ever feel like you're reliving the experience?
No, even the ones that are intense. And I've had enough of those. Like even those ones, there's such a detachment that I think that allows me to be pretty curious and like tuned in to the question of like why and how and what does that mean and so on.
Do you feel like your memories are accurate?
Yeah, I think they're accurate, but they're not incredibly fleshed out. And I think they're accurate, not in a way that I'm objectively experiencing it, but like I'm able to reflect on memories with an awareness of how I was feeling and how that might have impacted the space. I don't think I try to turn them into things that they're not. So I think there's a lot of accuracy there. My memory is a little selective. I'm able to remember certain things very, very well, like in the same way that I did, like say 7 times 12. Like if I pass over a book that kind of sticks out to me at the library, and then I see something that like alludes to it like 3 weeks later, I can be like, oh, I saw that book on the shelf really recently and it kind of stuck out to me. But that's not like a conscious thing. That's just like, oh, that book felt kind of meaningful.
Okay. So how would you describe how your mind stores information?
Like a computer, like there's a chip or something and it contains a lot of stuff and I can't necessarily just file through it with my fingers, but the information that needs to come to the surface will come up in its own time. And I've learned to trust that ability.
Okay. Does that feel like that's just kind of happening behind the scenes in a mysterious way? Or do you have some tangible control over that? Are there any rooms or compartments in your mind that you store different things in or can go different places or anything like that?
Well, if there are, I hope to discover that someday.
All right.
But as far as I can tell, it's just whatever wants to come up. I'm very mercurial, I think, in the sense that there's a feeling of giving my full self. Like when I speak, when I engage, it feels like everything that wants to come out is able to come out just in real time. And that's not going to be just a barrage of whatever's stored internally. But I think I'm intuitive about allowing the right material to come to the surface. And that's not me sorting through it on my own accord. That's just trusting that what needs to come up, what wants to come up, what might be fun to come up is going to come up in its own time.
So we have the phrase in our society of search your mind. If you're going to do that, if you're going to search your mind for a particular thing, do you feel like that's pretty successful? Like, I want to think about this thing, so it's going to come. Can you rely on that pretty well?
That's a good question. Can I rely on it? I think rely is the wrong word.
Okay.
I'm not solving complex issues in my day-to-day life. I'm not doing these grand research questions that demand a very specific type of answer. Typically, I'm going over like processes or how to track things down, helping people with like technology or like, setting up a computer account or an email account. And there are different ways of doing that. And I have like this sort of innate understanding of the path of least resistance forward in terms of like doing those types of tasks. If somebody asks me a question, I'm never filing through things or grasping for things. Sometimes there's a little bit of a calculation. And again, it's not like a conscious calculation where I'm like doing an equation in my head, but it's a calculation of seeing the person that I'm working with, understanding what their experience and perspective and knowledge looks like, just like in a split instant, like it doesn't even take any time. And then being able to communicate in a way that attunes to that and tries to communicate what wants to come up in a way that matches their capacity for understanding and language. And that's never like a thing that I'm orchestrating myself. I have as much trust in that as I do for the lyrics that want to come up or like having a conversation with you and saying whatever comes out of my mouth.
Right. Okay. Very good. Do you think that having aphantasia affected how you performed in school?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that I have a lot of similar characteristics to someone who has ADHD, even though I don't think I have ADHD. But in terms of just how my memory functions and the way that I'm able to focus or not focus on different tasks, depending on how they interest me. Like I've gotten enough feedback from people to know that like there's some level of intelligence to my experience, but I was a lousy student. I had good relationships with my teachers, but I was such a poor student because I never learned how to study. I still don't know how to study. I could do tests sometimes if it was like general enough where I could just like throw my understanding of a lot of different things like at the window and most of it would stick. If it was like really specific, like had to do with like memorization, I was just absolute shit. Like I just couldn't do it. Like I was bad at learning languages. I was bad at like learning rules if they didn't feel like they had like an everyday relevance to my life. Like I was a poor student.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I struggled a lot as well with those similar things. What about your current career? Do you think aphantasia affects that at all?
Yeah, I think it does, but not in a direct way. I think it affects it in the way that I'm able to communicate with people without getting distracted by myself. I don't think that it's a handicap in that regard. I don't think it's a handicap in a lot of regards. It's just different. So I'm working at the library and I'm helping people and I'm organizing things and I have a lot of autonomy. I'm in a big building, this beautiful downtown branch. I'm working in isolation a lot of the time. I'm working with other people a lot of the time. I'm doing different tasks. I know how I'm supposed to do things. It's not necessarily scheduling things in my mind. Sometimes it's writing information down so I can use it as a reference. But I don't think about visualization whatsoever when I'm working. I don't think about my lack of visualization whatsoever when I'm working. I think that this position is really good for me because there's a lot of autonomy and like I know that I'm skilled and practiced in a lot of the stuff, especially dealing with people in like a supportive role. I think it's a safe place and a sustainable enough place for me. What I'd like to be doing is more music. What I'd like to be doing is maybe platforming myself to some degree and like sharing my music with people. And I think that that becomes difficult without the visualization because I don't have like this grand picture of like how these parts are supposed to work together or like this understanding of like how I'm seen by other people. That's something I've always kind of struggled with. So even though I can make the music, there's something lost in translation between like actually creating it and then getting to the point where I'm sharing with other people in like a primarily visual and like audio based way. So there are limitations, but they don't come up in my library work necessarily.
Okay. Can you identify any other possible downsides to having aphantasia that you've noticed in your life? And then on the flip side, upsides, positives?
So aphantasia as we've constantly hinted at throughout this conversation, aphantasia is like one angle of something that's much larger, like the way that the mind operates as a whole. And I have a lot of trouble, I think, communicating to people, like especially people that I'm growing closer to, like communicating really the lack of what's going on internally for me and how things are very sensory. And I think that makes it difficult to really get people to trust my internal experience to the same degree that I trust my own internal experience. So there are struggles with like connecting with other people, I would say. Like people experience like a shared emotional space. You know, when you connect with someone like in a romantic way or in a friendship way or in just like a networking way or whatever, I think people just assume there's going to be like a shared emotional context. And most of the time I don't totally have that. Like I'm kind of a hermit, you know, I'll take what I take, I'll get what I get, but I don't need all of it. Like I'm never really demanding. And I think that takes people aback because even though we can't see into their internal experiences, I think that they have a lot of like secret demands and wishes that they kind of project onto other people. And I don't vibe with that as much. You know, I see through that, I think, to some degree, especially working with so many demographics of people like in my day-to-day life, where I can see what people bring into the conversation. And I'm more concerned about just getting to like the core of it. I think it makes me appear a little bit alien to other people, like especially when they connect with me on a more deep level and they see that I'm not bullshitting, that this is actually how I process the world.
Right.
So maybe that's a downside to some degree. And then also, I wish that writing music felt more streamlined, but I also feel like I'm honing in on like the way that I'm supposed to do it. And that's coming into fruition. And it's a style of creativity that works for me. It's not necessarily seeing it, but it's being able to channel it. I'm getting better at that. And then for upsides, all that at the same time, like all of that at the same time. Like, even though there are things that become struggles, there are aspects of who I am that I really, really appreciate because it's unique and it feels authentic. And like, I've had a lifetime of like honing in on these things. And I imagine that I'll be doing that for the rest of my life because I'm a reflective enough person. And I also think that I'm like attuned to a kind of objective understanding that isn't as easy for other people to access because I'm not as distracted by what's going on internally. I'm able to just kind of call a spade and so on.
Right. Yeah, I resonate with all of that. Very insightful and very well said again. All right, last question. If you could wave a magic wand and get rid of your aphantasia, would you do it?
No, why would I do that? That's like re-scripting my entire life, you know?
Right.
I would be at more of a handicap if I did that because I'd have to like renegotiate like my internal boundaries. Like, how do I relate to myself? No, I'm fine now.
All right, perfect. Okay, that is it. Edward, anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I talked about my songwriting process a little bit, and I'm getting better at sharing things online. I have an EP. You can find me under the name Roarford, Roereford. If you want to follow me on social media, I think I have links on my Spotify account. I'm getting all that stuff organized, but I've been writing some cool stuff lately, writing some stuff that alludes to my experience of aphantasia a little bit. I feel like that's important to communicate in song. So I'm looking forward to sharing more. And if that interests you, like tune in, give me a follow.
Perfect. And I will put all of that in the show notes as well.
Cool. Thank you, Shane.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Edward. It was a good one. I enjoyed everything that you said. You're very articulate and it was a good discussion. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for the invitation. And thank you for just having this space where you can have conversations like this. It's like, I don't know, I can listen to a lot of stuff when I'm working at the library. And for some reason, I choose your podcast over and over again.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, follow, and engage with us. And share it with your friends and family as we continue to explore this fascinating subject. For additional information about this episode or Shane's Brain, check out the show notes. Thanks for listening to the Discovering Your Mind podcast. You are beautifully unique.